I absolutely love my FujiFilm X100VI. It has become my go-to everyday carry camera, but there are some things about it that I wish I knew before I purchased it. So I thought I'd make this video, put together a list, and share it with all of you. The first thing I wish I knew before buying this camera is that the lens extends and retracts as it's focusing. Now, it doesn't move a lot, and if you never plan on using filters, then this won't ever be a problem for you. But if you do plan on using filters, the solution isn't as clear-cut as you would think. For starters, I'm guessing that most of you, just like me, are interested in the X100VI because of its form factor. It's portable, it's lightweight, easy to take around. But the second you start adding filters to the front of this lens, you need to buy adapter rings. Now, because the lens extends and retracts as it's focusing, these adapter rings need to be a certain height so that way the lens doesn't crash into the filter element. So in my research, I found that the filter adapters need to be somewhere around the 10mm thickness in order for the lens not to crash into the filters. But when you take into consideration the 10mm of the filter adapter plus the filters, you're adding almost a half of an inch to the overall length of your camera's lens. To add salt to the wound, Fuji's official adapter ring cost almost $50 US, which is completely outrageous to me. But finding a third-party adapter ring is a lot harder than I thought it would be. I read a ton of reviews about lenses crashing into filters or the stock lens caps not fitting on. And some of the filter adapters were just really tall and I didn't want to add unnecessary length to the lens of the camera. I tried a handful of different adapter rings and I ended up liking this one from Haug the best. It was the lowest profile ring that I could find that had 0 reports of lenses crashing into filters. It still allows the stock lens cap to fit, which is really nice, and it only costs 10 bucks. I actually think I like the look of this JJC ring a little better, but the problem is that it's a little taller and it has this pretty aggressive knurling on it, and I think the diameter might be slightly larger than stock, which means that the stock lens hood fits on here a little tight. Not too bad, but a little tight, to the point where I worry that the soft flocking material on the lens cap will get worn out prematurely. The JJC adapter ring also costs $10. I'll be sure to link both of these down below in the description if you guys want to check them out. The second thing that I wish I knew about this camera before I purchased it is the manual focus is almost unusable. I say that because the focus throw is way too long. It takes like a million turns to go from your minimum focus point to your maximum focus point, and that's just not practical. The manual focus does have 2 separate settings. It has a linear and a non-linear. The non-linear is a little better, but it's still not good, especially on the close end of the focusing range. I would only use manual focus with this camera if I knew that I had a lot of time to set up for my shot. Number 3 on the list is this power switch. It is way too easy to flip that thing on accident. I've already done it so many times, I've lost count. I've accidentally flipped that switch, putting the camera into a camera bag. Now, for comparison, I've only done that maybe once or twice in like 6 years of owning Sony cameras. I've only maybe done it once or twice. This one, I've done it so many times that I've lost count. It's so easy to flip this thing. It takes hardly 0 pressure to do that. So it seems like something easy to fix. I'm hoping that in the X100VII, whatever they call it, I hope that they can add some stiffness to this switch so it doesn't get flipped so easily. For the type of photography that I like to use this camera for, Aperture Priority works really well. However, Aperture Priority on this camera could be improved. So let me explain. On my Sony cameras, I can assign a custom button to instantly enter into my minimum shutter speed setting when using auto ISO. You can't do that on Fujifilm cameras. What I can do is set a custom button to enter into my auto ISO settings, but I still have to drill down into 2 submenus to get to my minimum shutter speed, which just really slows down the workflow and is not great, especially when you're shooting subjects that are moving really fast or changing their speed really fast and under different lighting conditions. So it seems like something that could be easily updated in firmware. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed and hope to see that in a future update. Number 5 on my list is kind of a weird one because it's not going to affect all of you. And it pertains to a hardware bug found on the X100 line, not just the 6, but the other models as well. What happens is my diopter setting is different for my EVF and my OVF. So let me explain. So if I have my EVF up, I can dial in the diopter so that way my EVF is tack sharp, completely in focus. And then if I switch to the OVF, the heads-up display will be tack sharp, but the optical image will be slightly out of focus. Now I can focus in on that optical image using the diopter, but once I do that, then the heads-up display goes slightly out of focus. So after doing a little bit of research, I did find a bunch of other cases of people who had the same issue. Honestly, in my opinion, for my model or my particular unit, it's not bad enough that I want to send my camera in to get fixed. I mean, to be honest, it took me a while to even notice that it was there, and I've had other people use the camera and they didn't notice either. So for me, it's not that big of an issue, but if any of you watching this are thinking about picking up a used X100VI, or even if you're buying a new one, it may be something that you want to look at when you receive the camera. The front and rear command dials of this camera are not as customizable as some of the reviewers on YouTube will lead you to think. I've seen some reviewers claim that the front and rear command dials are fully customizable. Now, in my head, that means I can assign almost any function I can think of to these dials, but that is definitely not the case. So when you dive into the Fuji menus, the only things that you can assign to the front and rear command dials are ISO, aperture, shutter speed, and exposure compensation. We've all seen a ton of gorgeous images coming straight out of camera from the X100 line of cameras. And I can almost guarantee you that a good number of those images have some kind of clarity adjustment done. Now, if you don't already know, having your clarity set to anything but 0 will add some amount of processing time between shots. For me, I find the processing time to be completely acceptable for the kind of photography that I'm using this camera for. However, I always have at least one custom profile in here that has the clarity set to 0, so that way I can snap off a bunch of pictures in quick succession if I have to. Maybe it's because I've been a Sony shooter for so long, but when I dove into the Fujifilm menu system for the first time, I was like, man, this is pretty bad. The first thing that bugged me, while it's a small thing, it's the fonts that change size. Who decided that longer strings versus shorter strings should get larger and smaller font sizes? It looks odd and it makes things harder to read overall. The second thing that I really missed coming from Sony is like a quick help menu that gives you a short description of the setting that you're looking at. So on Sony, if you come across a menu item that you don't know exactly what it does, you can hit a button and a little description will pop up telling you what it does. As far as I know, Fujifilm does not have that, and that meant that when I was first setting up this camera, I was pretty much living with the manual side by side with the camera to know what everything did. Now these are just nitpicky things because the more and more you use your camera, the ugly menus will just disappear and you'll eventually know what every single function in this camera does. But if you're new to photography, I can imagine that this could be a challenge for you to get up and running exactly the way you want. So I did want to call it out. Now, the last item on my list is something that really disappointed me when I first got this camera, and it's that there are no zebras in stills mode. Now, to be honest, I should have looked at that before I purchased the camera, but in all honesty, I just assumed that they would be there, but they're not, and I was disappointed. The X100VI does have what they call live view highlight alert mode, which will like flash all the sections that are clipping. I guess that's better than nothing, but it's super distracting and you can't actually set a custom percentage like you can with zebras. So while it is better than nothing, it's definitely not as nice as zebras. So I'm hoping that that's something that they could potentially add to the stills feature of these cameras, because zebras are on 100% of the time when I'm shooting Sony. All right, that's the list. I do want to say one more time that I do absolutely love this camera and it's not going anywhere. None of the things on this list are a deal breaker for me, but I do want to say that if I do need to do more serious photography, I have a bunch of more professional cameras that I can fall back on. But I thought that the things on this list might be important for someone who's just getting into cameras and photography, if this is going to be your first camera, or if you're thinking about ditching another camera system and coming over to Fuji. I think that these things would be things that I would want to know if I was switching camera systems. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them down in the comments below and I'll do my absolute best to answer every single one of them. If this is your first time here, my name is Matt and I do videos about photography, videography, cameras. I do reviews, vlogs, I do all that good stuff. So if you don't want to miss out on any future content, please consider liking and subscribing because it helps me out a lot. Again, my name is Matt and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.